Coming up next, an interview with a legend who technically recorded his first hit at just 15 years of age. Actually snuck into a club and he heard today's song being played by this local band, and he noticed that the audience loved it. So he decided to cut the record himself, but he forgot the lyrics and he made some up of his own to make it work. The recording wasn't very good, but he didn't think it'd go anywhere. Song got released, it got some airplay, and was forgotten pretty quick. Then a few years later, it reemerged after getting played at dance parties. Then it was bootlegged and sold almost 100,000 copies. 6 major labels picked up on this, and a bidding war to sign this artist was brewing, till a small label owned by a mobster threatened everybody and swooped in to sign this young artist. And a short time later, that song hit #1 across America, and to this day, many people think the song was re-recorded. But come to find out, it was that old crappy demo that many point to as the first punk song. This crazy story's coming up next on Professor of Rock. Hey, music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if you ever had the Nintendo Power Glove back in the day, you're going to want to subscribe to this channel below. Click the red button, click the bell so you always know when our latest and greatest come out. Also check out our Patreon and our merch below. I'm excited to bring you another episode from our series Revelations, where featured artists reveal rare stories about the biggest songs, along with fascinating insight about their careers you won't hear anywhere else. On this installment of Revelation, we have a legendary guest that quietly sold over 100 million records, and yet he made almost nothing from it because a mobster owned his label and didn't pay him. But today we focus on his first ever hit, song that he recorded when he was only 15 years old. Talking about Tommy James and the Shondells and the classic #1 hit, Hanky Panky.
My baby does the hanky panky.
This was written by Jeff Barry and Ellie Greenwich, who wrote many standards of the day, including Be My Baby. This songwriting couple recorded it themselves in their group The Raindrops, and they released it as a B-side.
My baby does the hanky panky.
They both thought the song was horrible. It just says the same thing over and over, and they actually wrote it when they were at Lover's Lane while everybody else was sucking face. These two were writing the song.
My baby does the hanky panky. My baby.
Now, when a 15-year-old kid named Tommy Jackson snuck into a club in Indiana and heard a local band play the song, he saw the crowd loved the song, kind of dancing to it. He actually recorded it at a radio station. It was a really crappy recording. Did it with his group, the Shondells. Song was put out on the Snap label. It did okay, but it was mostly forgotten pretty quick. And then about 18 months later, Tommy broke up with the Shondells, and he was only 18, just getting ready to graduate from high school. And then a DJ from Pittsburgh had been playing an old version of Hanky Panky at some dances. And it caused an earthquake of popularity. It was so big, bootleggers made replicas of it and sold nearly 100,000 illegal copies of the song. Crazy. When Tommy found out about the popularity of Hanky Panky, he was floored. He was getting offers to play gigs, but he just didn't have a band anymore. He was a solo act, Tommy Jackson. So he decided to ask a local band he came into contact with named the Raconteurs to become the new Shondells, and he changed his name to Tommy James. By then, record labels lined up to sign Tommy and the Shondells, and there were some big ones. There was Columbia, Epic, Atlantic, a few more. There's also a smaller label called Roulette. It was run by a mobster, Morris Levy. Tommy thought he would have a great opportunity to choose a great label for a great contract since it would be a bidding war. Then all of a sudden, the labels all called him and said they were out. So it turns out that Morris Levy, the mobster, scared all of them away. He wanted to be the guy to put Tommy out there. So he made Tommy an offer he couldn't refuse, and Roulette put out Hanky Panky. It went straight to #1 in the summer of '66. This is when Tommy was barely out of high school. A legendary but silly song that repeats the same phrase 23 times. That's why it was a B-side. But Tommy made it his own. Funny enough, when Tommy recorded it, he couldn't remember all the lyrics, like I said, from the original Raindrops version. So he made them up on the spot.
I saw her walking on down the line. Yeah, I saw.
It just worked. That's how it goes, right? It took Tommy from playing to a dozen drunks in a bar to over 10,000 fans pretty much overnight. And Tommy, he earned it, every bit of it. Coming up next, Tommy is going to give us the story. Here's the interview. Let's talk about the greatest winning lottery ticket in the history of rock and roll, Hanky Panky.
My baby does the hanky panky.
To my ears, there has never been a better story of a song that comes out and then makes your fortune a few years later. Written, of course, by the great Jeff Barry and Ella Graham.
Only in America.
I know.
Only in America. It's one of those stories that probably can't happen now either.
I know.
It probably
I
could
know.
only happen right then.
But I mean, this team who wrote,
so many
Do-Wah
hits.
Diddy.
She looked good.
And of course, Be My Baby, and one of the greatest songs of all time. You, of course, went to #1 in the U.S., number 39 on the R&B charts, which is pretty awesome, and number 38 in the U.K. You heard it sneaking into Shula's club in South Bend.
You did your homework. Holy cow. Well, that's
Tell me about
true.
that.
That's absolutely the truth. What happened was I had been really burned by a group called the Rivieras, who resided about 30 miles from Niles, and they had a #1 record with California Sun. And I was just as jealous as I could be. And so this was in the back of my head. And I went into a nightclub called Shula's. I was 15 years old. I had no business being there. This was on a Sunday afternoon. And I saw a group.
The Spinners.
The Spinners.
Not
the R&B
Spinners.
group. No,
right.
no.
Different group.
Right. They played this song called Hanky Panky. And they must have played it a half a dozen times. And every time they did, the floor just filled up immediately. People who had never heard the song before just jumped on the dance floor. And I said, we got to do that. And all I could remember, there were actually a whole bunch of words to it, but all I could remember was, my baby does the hanky panky. So I talked to my guys in the group. I said, we got to record this.
My baby loves the hanky panky.
And we did, but I first went back to the record shop where I worked.
Yeah.
It turns out it was the flip side of a song called That Boy John by the Raindrops on Jubilee Records.
But that boy John, shoot him when it says to me, baby.
They had taken That Boy John off of the market because, pulled the record because it was about JFK and he had just been killed. And so the B-side went with it. And I would have never heard that song if it wasn't for this local group, the Spinners.
Oh, my baby's fine.
So I went in the studio. We had the WNIL radio studio, and with the producer, who was Jack Douglas, not the famous Jack Douglas.
Right.
You realize everybody in my life has the same name, but they're not the famous.
They're not the one.
And we recorded Hanky Panky.
Yeah.
And it was released locally and went #1 locally in about 6 square blocks, but we had no distribution, so the record just died.
When you made up the verses, because you didn't know the song. You wrote
made
some
up the
different
bridge and
verses.
stuff, yeah. What it boils down to is the record came and went, and we kind of forgot about it. In 1965, I graduated from high school. I took my band on the road, and we were playing, throughout the Midwest. Chicago, and Rush Street were playing, and, cover band. And in early '66, we're playing this dumpy little bar in Janesville, Wisconsin. And right in the middle of my 2 weeks, the guy goes belly up. The IRS shuts him down for not paying his taxes. And so we had to really do some talking to get our equipment out of there. But that's how the good Lord works, because I went back home to Niles, Michigan, feeling like a dog.
No real prospects.
Oh, God, feeling like such a loser.
Yeah.
And as soon as I get home, I get the call that changes my life.
From Jack.
Well,
Right?
yes, that's
Yeah.
right. And he told me to stay right where I was. They were hunting me down. And I get a call from Pittsburgh that Hanky Panky, this record that I'd made 2 years earlier, was sitting at number 1 in
Pittsburgh.
In the city of Pittsburgh. They had found it in a record bin, so I call it a has-been, and they started playing it, and they bootlegged and sold 80,000 records in 10 days, and we were sitting at number 1. It's a good thing we had put Snap Records, Niles, Michigan on there because they tracked me
That's how
down.
they did.
And where did they call but the record shop where I used to work, and got me. And if I hadn't have been home at that moment, I'd have never got the call.
Jeez. And Bob Mack started playing it in all his clubs, his dance clubs, and people
That's
were
correct.
going nuts.
Yes, that was in Pittsburgh, but I didn't know anything about that till I got there.
Right.
And so I went to Pittsburgh and saw a group in a club that I liked a lot. And I said, would you like to be the Shondells? Because I couldn't put the original
Because they all
group
moved
together.
on.
Yes.
One
And
joined the service.
couple of them
another-
did.
Yeah.
And the group that I ran into in Pittsburgh was called the Raconteurs.
Yep.
I loved the way they sang. I sat in with them and we knew a lot of the same songs. They became the new Shondells. And a week later, we went to New York to sell the master.
What's interesting about it is that I always read that when they did the 80,000 copies and did that, it speeded up the record a little bit as well. And that
I
was
sped it up slightly.
was,
And it was on another label called Red Fox Records.
When you recorded that though, originally, the guitar, I mean, you were really early on with that guitar sound, a guitar solo.
It was
too.
mono. It was there was no overdubbing or anything. It was we played it live. I've tried to do re-records. I've tried to record Hanky Panky again. I can't do it. I tried to make it sound that bad. I couldn't do it. And it was just a combination of just happy accidents.
Mad Mike, also playing it, and it
That's right.
it was just one of those moments it was supposed to be. What you were doing, what you guys were doing with the guitars in that original thing.
Well, thank you.
That was, at the moment, a few months later, You Really Got Me was being recorded by the Kinks. You guys had the same feeling and energy that was happening.
I love it best.
Yeah.
Garage garbage rock is unbeatable. I'm a nut for garbage rock. So that's
I
me.
love it. You go to New York and you meet with a lot of the major labels.
That's true. And this is really a wild story, but I'll shorten it as best I can. We went to New York to sell the master to a major label. And we had appointments and got a yes from Columbia, from RCA, from Epic, from Lorry Records, Kama Sutra Records, you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
And Atlantic. And the last place we took the record to was Roulette Records. We took it to Roulette and just kind of dumped it off there. And the guys weren't in, they'd hear it tomorrow. But we had gotten a yes from all these major labels. And I went to bed that night feeling so good because I figured we'd be with one of the corporate labels, CBS or Atlantic.
Oh, yeah.
And so I was feeling really good. And about 9 o'clock the next morning, we stayed there in a hotel. And about 9 o'clock the next morning, we started getting calls from all the labels that had said yes the day before.
Yeah.
And they all said, listen, Tom, we got to pass. And I said, what do you mean you got to pass? I thought we had a deal. I'm sorry, Tom, we just have to pass. And so Jerry Wexler at Atlantic finally tells me the truth that Morris Levy, the head of Roulette Records, and a very notorious character, called all of the other labels and scared him to death and said, this is my record. Back off. And they did. And every one of those labels. And that was so we're going, what in the hell is going on? And finally, we learned what's going on, unbeknownst to us. And by the way, this was the first offer I couldn't refuse. I went to Roulette that day and met Morris Levy. And Morris Levy was right out of Central Casting. I mean, he was about 250, 6'3", a real tough guy. And he talked like this. And we were apparently going to be on Roulette Records. And but what I didn't know, and we signed with Roulette Records, and they took Hanky Panky to #1 all over the planet. But what I didn't know, and what we learned incrementally, was that Roulette, in addition to being a functioning indie label, was also a front for the Genovese crime family in New York.
Gosh.
And of course, that made life really interesting for us. You know, while we're hanky pankying and moaning, and we got this very sinister story going on behind us that we couldn't talk about.
Gosh.
And until we wrote that book,
which there's some great stories in there. So many about Morris and.
Well, until we wrote that book, we
couldn't say anything.
No.
Yeah.
And the reason when we started the book, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but when Martin Fitzpatrick and I started the book, we were going to call it Crimson and Clover, and we were going to write about making hits and, writing songs and stuff. Would have been interesting, but we got about a third of the way into it and realized that if we didn't tell the Roulette story, we were cheating ourselves and everybody else, because that was the story.
Oh, yeah.
And so I was very nervous about continuing because some of these guys were still walking around.
You don't want to wake up with a horse's head in your bed.
No. Or mine.
I know.
So we put it on a shelf for about 3 years until the rest of the Roulette regulars, as I call them, passed away.
Yeah.
And then we could finish the book.
Gosh.
And that's what we did. And as soon as we finished it, we started getting calls from, book publishers and the movie rights and the Broadway rights. And Simon & Schuster published it.
Great book.
Thank you. So I didn't mean to jump ahead there.
No,
but
that's great.
That's the Hanky Panky story.
Oh, yeah.
My baby does the hanky panky. Yeah, my baby.
What did you think about when it was used in Forrest Gump?
That was amazing.
Wasn't that
I
incredible?
wasn't expecting it. I saw the movie. I didn't know my song. It was in the movie.
My baby does the hanky panky. Yeah, my baby.
To use Hanky Panky, that had to be an honor.
We've been so lucky. We've had this will be 60 movies.
I know. We'll talk about some of them here coming
and
up.
350 cover versions by artists that you'd never think would be, from Prince to Dolly
the Killers.
Parton, doing the same song.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Really.
My baby does the hanky panky. My baby.
You're 19 years old and you got the #1 record in the country. I mean, that must have just felt incredible to hear that on the radio.
Believe me, it's one of those experiences that can only happen once. It's like falling in love.
Yeah.
You can only fall in love once, really, that hard and that big.
Yep.
It's something that it's hard to explain what that feels like.
Yeah.
But it certainly started my career in the major leagues, and I thank the good Lord for it every day.
Leave us a comment about Hanky Panky. Seriously, a lot of people think this is the first punk song, definitely garage rock song. I mean, just a classic. It's just so funny that it was a crappy recording, went to #1. I guess, people love what they love. I think it's a cool song. Anyway, leave us a comment about the song. What are your memories of it? And let's have a great discussion. If you like our content, we invite you to subscribe. Come be a part of the community. Till next time, 3 Chords and the truth, my friends.